I'm going to tell you the story. It's going
Gossip and the secrets.
sound different in person, don't you? What they're doing at the Athletic is actually rough.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Canelo and who he wants to fight.
Mike Tyson.
A lot of these remakes fucking suck.
Something magical about it.
I don't see how they survived this.
And I'm recording. Marquis Jones is my guest on Azizi podcast. How's it going, sir?
Pretty good, Aziz. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right, and you're not the first person who calls me Aziz, and I will correct you one time. It's Azizi podcast, so it's Azizi is my last name, Samir is my first name. You can call me
That's
Azizi if you want to. Yeah.
Azizi it is. All right.
Okay, that's all good. I was actually thinking how to pronounce your name correctly, but when I was doing like some of my research, like just a little bit, I was listening to podcasts with you at all. They called you Marquis. I'm like, okay, Marquis, because I was like, is it Marcus or Marquis?
Oh,
So
man.
it's Marquis, yeah.
You'll be surprised the roadblock I run into with that, where I'm pretty much being called Marcus. Maurice is a good one I always fall into for some strange reason. Montez comes up every so now and then. It's still Marquis, but I just love the variations of how people interpret my name as something completely different. It always cracks me up every time.
Well, I'm very proud of myself for guessing it the first time correctly, Marquis. And it's actually, I like how it sounds, Marquis Jones. It's very I don't know, very masculine.
It's streamlined. Yeah.
So, long story short, it's funny because I was thinking today, like, how come I haven't heard about you before? And I was like, but that doesn't make sense because you're a boxing writer, you have a podcast, you're on the boxing scene a lot. And I've been around for a couple of years only, but I was on the West Coast all the time. I was in California and Los Angeles. Yeah. And I think that's like the main reason. I feel like because then Ernie Green also like appeared on Twitter in my like environment, and he invited me to the chat, and there was a bunch of other people. I was like, how come I don't know you guys? What's happening? I only knew Gail, and plus Gail was on the West Coast. And I think it's kind of like the East Coast West Coast thing. Somehow like the signal is not getting to Los Angeles, to West Coast. I don't know why, but that's like a phenomenon that I noticed. What do you think?
I think especially like with boxing Twitter, especially on some things, like especially like with folks meeting on and whatnot. Like I think that this big disconnect is that for some reason or another, it's the way their algorithms or whatever the way their system is set up is that for some reason boxing on my end doesn't happen west of Alabama. So anything that happens on the West Coast that wasn't like from like ESPN or just some sort of random Golden Boy news feed, like I just wouldn't see it. So I wouldn't see half these people unless I was either doing like media conference calls or I'm with those people. Like that's how I know Gail personally, where it's like you hear the same people on the same media calls over and over again for these fights that are upcoming, or just in general where like you just have to look on ratings and clippings. But like, yeah, it's really bizarre about that you never heard of your boy here. But no, I've been around, man, in and out of it for a solid 15 years. Most of it was at the lower level at the very beginning, back in like the early 2000s.
So tell me about this, because my podcast is exactly about, it's about lives, right? It's about, how people started in anything, not only boxing, but any other industries. I do a lot of boxing, but I'm interested in people's path in general. So yeah, I wanted just to learn more about you because, again, I actually do not know you much. And it would be great to sort of learn about you. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get involved with this part of boxing?
Pretty much, I was always around it, and I'm going to tell you the story. It's going to sound probably like every other cliche boxing story you heard so far before beginning and end.
Okay,
but I grew up as a kid watching Tyson fights at my parents' house, and that's always been the go-to. And because my parents were the ones that were always hosting the Tyson fights, and they would always be always there. And pretty much just as a kid growing up, after that, just always grew up keeping up with it, watching like. As a kid growing up on USA here in the States, Tuesday night fights on Tuesdays and just random fight cards wherever on HBO, like everybody else. I mean, I wish I had some sort of crazy, like, Rocky story for you about that, but it's really just me as a kid growing up watching just Tyson fights like everybody else.
Uh-huh. And what did you feel when you watched Tyson fights? I mean, because I don't know. You grew up in the 90s, but I feel like you're older than me. I'm 28 right now, and I don't really remember Tyson fights very well. How old were you when you were watching them?
I was about 7 or 8, and actually at this point, I am a solid decade ahead of you. I turned 38 next year, so I'm a decade ahead of you on this. So that may explain a lot of it, actually, because you saw Tyson at his point when he was pretty much on the way out.
Exactly.
I saw him as a kid going on the way up, and that's pretty much the big disconnect between pretty much the late 80s and pretty much 80s boxing and 90s boxing in general. Is just pretty much the path of Tyson in regards to it, because of course he went to jail, and then there was that gray area of that period. But once he came back out of jail, he had this 90s reemergence of coming back up, and then the Holyfield fights happened, and then the Lennox Lewis fights happened, and then the Kevin McBride fight happened, and now here we are, present day.
So was the Tyson then? Mike Tyson was the gateway for you to get into boxing? Were you like with me? It was Triple G. I was watching Triple G a lot. I was like, I'm a huge fan of Triple G, and I was watching his fights, and sort of, I started following journalists and what they talk about. Then I started watching other fights and like getting into this, scene in general. Was that for you? Mike Tyson was the same for you?
For me, it was, because at that point, as a kid, just growing up, that maybe had to go backwards and look at like all the other heavyweights, past and present, and whatnot. That's when you would like to see like the Jack Johnsons, all, that's going way, way back, and then more recent, like with the Joe Lewises, and then of course Muhammad Ali along those lines, and Larry Holmes was a staple on Tuesday night fights on USA as a kid growing up. So I always look back at some of those fights he had as a kid as well in the 80s and early 70s, and it's like. It's interesting where, like, he was the gateway for me in regards to it. Once time growing on, I found, other boxes and other weight classes. I just kept up with it just in terms of, like, everybody else. It's kind of funny. I'm going to cross-reference one of the podcasts you had on before where you had BoxRec Gray on.
Yes.
And his path up towards boxing with numbers and stuff like that is semi-similar to mine as well, where he mentioned on your podcast with this, actually, that he used to keep it with statistics in baseball. Obviously, me, we're in the baseball stuff here, the only team in town here in Tampa. It's kind of the same path on that. And I was the kid growing up with that, with baseball as well, where they had this magazine growing up, especially in the 90s. They kind of, if you can find it, they're kind of relics now, but because it pretty much baseballreference.com is what it is now. But back in the day before technology picked up, there would be this yearly almanac called Who's Who in Baseball. And I would have yearly collections of those. It'd be like $20. It'd have like Barry Bonds or whoever on the cover, Ken Griffey. And then you have like all the baseball players, their stats, their numbers, their teams, their designations, when they got traded, when they re-signed. It was, next level nerd stuff. And it's always funny when I always hear like stuff like that. But that was always my crossway with that, was sports as well. Would always watch baseball, watch occasional basketball, but boxing was always the one sport I always tried to keep up with the most.
So at what point did you decide, like, okay, I want to actually be in this? I want to, because right now you are a writer and you're a podcaster, and so you're covering the fights. So that's something that you do for a living, or at least partially what you do for a living. When was that moment when you decide, like, okay, I want to do this? I want to dedicate, my professional career to this particular sport.
Just on my end, it was something I always wanted to pursue, just in terms of this, wanted to cover sports in general. I wanted to be some sort of sports broadcaster in some way or avenue. And the way I figured I'd get into it was, and this is going to sound like something so late 90s, early 2000s when I tell you this, is that I wanted to graduate from college and work for the local newspaper and then covering sports. Yeah.
So where did you graduate from?
I actually kind of dropped out, actually.
Okay. So you were the rebel. The Zuckerberg
I was
type.
the rebel. Yeah, I was the other guy who decided to stay away from all that book stuff.
Okay.
You know what it was? I got the psychology class. They mentioned Pavlov and the peanut butter and the dog. I withdrew and kept it moving after that. I just couldn't deal. But
what? Hold on a second. What do you mean?
Oh, Psychology 101. There's a big chapter that they do on Pavlov. Where
I know the Pavlovian
yeah.
dog with the saliva and smell of food, like all of that.
Yeah, so I misinterpreted, but yeah, pretty much the whole dog and peanut butter thing is somewhere came along the lines of that, and I was just like, yeah, I just can't get with any of this. But maybe the class was just too boring for me. I just couldn't deal.
Okay.
But that was my deal with it. But after that, I just did the old-fashioned way, where I just picked up either internships at local radio stations in town, or just started doing freelance writing the first go-around back in the early 2000s.
Always in Tampa?
Yeah. At this point, I was back in Tampa. Yeah, I always followed up with that. Where I was fighting the local fighters down here. In the early 2000s, the big fighters down here were Wanky Wright and Jeff Lacey when they were doing your title ship reign. Because pretty much all the boxers here train at St. Pete Boxing Club. That's the big mecca for boxing gyms here. It's kind of like Detroit's Kronk Gym, essentially. It's the same wavelength of priority. So a lot of the fighters will train there. And a lot of their earlier fights were beat. If you're locally here, the building's closed down now. I think they're turning into a condominium project now. But back in the day, if you look at it, the Egypt Lake Shrine Building, which I knew growing up here as the a la carte pavilion, was a place where they had all the local club shows and whatnot. And you just see a lot of early fights like that, like even more present day, like Keith Urban's early fight cards were there as well. Pretty much all of them go through that at some capacity, and they all were just fighting there. But back to answering your question, what got me to pursue it to begin with was the first go-round I was doing after I dropped out. I did radio internships, and then from that point, they had like the internships pretty much got me at that point an avenue as a kind of a free pass card to see some of these fights where I can say, hey, working with the radio station, hey, can I cover this fight? And be like, oh yeah, here's your press credential. Easy way 101. So I'll be able to cover some of the local club fights there, and just kept up with doing it there every so often with freelancing. And then from there, it just picked up, and then I got out of it. And then back in 2017, I got back into it, working with what I do now for Big Fight Weekend, where I just wanted to pick it back up and had to start from scratch. Just in terms of getting back into media, getting connections, talking to everybody, people knowing who the hell am I, and going from there.
Wait, so it's kind of funny though, right? Because I've been thinking about this for some time. Is when you are a boxing journalist or a boxing writer, like when you want to become a person like that, you're never motivated by, oh, I'm gonna get all this money or income. You only motivated by actually getting access. You're motivated by getting credentials, and getting into the the scene and getting into the event, and just be there. Like that's like the motivator for a lot of boxing writers.
What's funny? And it's funny you mentioned that, and it's one thing that's always misconception with people who keep up with boxing writers and think that there's some sort of weird bias with a lot of people, or they hate this or that. At the end of the day, we're just all big fans who just want the best seat in the house. And what better way to get the best seat in the house than to write about the fight you're going to, one, and two, just being around it all as a whole. And it for me, it made it a lot easier just to ask people about it, like, hey, how can I get here for this? Hey, can I talk to this person? Can I talk to so and so? And the easiest way to do that was just A, be annoying about it, and B, just keep asking until they tell you yes. And that's pretty much where I'm at now with it.
It's kind of funny. It's boxing is not as like a big industry as NFL or NBA, but something about this industry makes you very good, makes you feel very good when you are on the inside, because it's very relationship, it's very connections, who knows what, who gets what seats, who gets what access to people. Something magical about this, and something like you really want to be in this industry. You really want to know who knows who and who's gonna fight next. Like you want to know like the gossip and the secrets. And I talked about this before. There's a lot of talk in boxing. There's a lot of gossip in boxing, but it sort of kind of comes with the territory. And I was very surprised at the beginning about that. What do you think?
You know what it is with it? It's a lot of you may have realized as you gotten back into this that there's just a lot of conjecture and there's a lot of projection. And where in terms with, especially with like fight projections and like who's going to fight who, and everyone says a lot of this. The one thing I realized with this, Aziz, is that when it comes to boxing talk in terms of like fights, there's always a lot of talk. There's talk about fights going on now, and there's nobody fighting, at all. So especially during all this pandemic stuff. And so at this point, you have to take it with a grain of salt, but it's like, oh, well, when this pandemic ends, I'm going to fight you. And it's like, oh, okay. It's like, all right. Some of it you have to just tune out and take it for what it's worth. A lot of it, I've realized over time, is that the biggest way they can hype up a lot of these fights, especially in this day and age with social media and especially with marketing in general, is that all I can do is talk about it. I mean, it's a cliche where they say talk is cheap, and talk is cheap. However, in terms of making these fights happen, it helps. I mean, some of it comes off a little fabricated, but it's the one thing with that. But back to your first point, where you mentioned with boxing being a big, small circle, it really is a very small, close-knit family. You'll be surprised. And it's the one thing I've realized is being back in it as well, is that as long as you're nice to people, you can pretty much climb as high up the food chain as you want. As crazy as that sounds, it's not like, you can be nice in other organizations where it's like, oh, I'm nice to this person, like the NFL, for example. Like, oh, well, I'm nice to this football player. I want to talk to Roger Goodell. Yeah, that's not how that works. In boxing, if you're nice to a certain amount of people, you can talk to the top people at PBC. You can talk to a Bob Arum. You can talk to Eddie Hearn, where it's like, just be nice to them, not say they're jerks or whatever have you. Didn't expect like, well, he won't talk to me. Well, maybe because you called him a jerk. Just throwing it out there. I mean, it's kind of common sense and stuff like that. But
I'm a big proponent. I'm a big proponent of being nice, especially when the people are saying something on Twitter or anything like that, and then sort of act like they didn't say that. You're still kind of putting it out there, and so just keep in mind that people are watching and people are listening, and you will not just kind of get out of that without anyone noticing that. So it's just like, yeah, I completely agree. Being polite and being nice, not only in boxing but anywhere, is definitely a huge benefit. You're not making things worse, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Being nice.
I mean, and it's one thing, especially with just using social media as an example. Like, usually for most part, social media, I fought for years. So I've just used it just to complain about things so I can get free stuff from corporations. I kind of thought that's how the internet worked to begin with. Like, usually with everything else, is just like, oh, okay, that's cool. I usually just go in there, like, you play, like, X name brand, like, sucks. And then the corporation that works for X name brand shoots me a DM and I get, like, a free gift card or a free meal. That's kind of the way it worked back for a while. Now, not so much with everything going on, but it's weird with that. And also I realized working as just doing writing as well is that you never know who's going to read your writing. So you have to make sure you don't say anything that you wouldn't say to a person's face, where it's like, well, so-and-so says this. And it's like, well, I think he's an idiot and all that junk says. And then he just rolls up on you. Then it's like, well, hi. And then you clam up and it's like, oh, you sound different in person, don't you? And it's like, no, you can't be that person. So
there's a fine line though, right? Like there's a fine line between criticism and between being rude and at the same time kissing someone's ass. And that's where like I'm like it's kind of interesting, right? You try like if you're criticizing something, like actually put your money where your mouth is, basically. Be serious about it, critical. You don't have to go personal or anything like that. But if you don't like someone for certain things and you want to write about it, I would say write about it. And again, I know there are risks. There are some people who are very thin-skinned and they will not handle it and they will not give you access to certain things. But this is where it comes where, like, okay, and you can do it either way. You can either kiss ass and try to, maneuver and hope that you can get as much access as you can, and that can maybe benefit you in the short time. Or you can be critical if there's a reason to be critical about it, and then actually stand by your words when you actually meet this person or this organization face to face. But then again, there's risk that you will basically be blacklisted. So, being a boxing journalist, it's an interesting. It's an interesting career, ethically speaking, and I don't know. I don't know what is the right answer, and luckily, because I don't know if I would handle it, I would probably kiss everyone's ass if I was a boxing journalist. But like to have balls to be critical and then stand by your words, that's admirable too.
The one thing I can recommend to you, just sage advice if anyone's listening to this, is that just state your point and be objective about it. Just say, if you say something stinks, explain why you think it stinks. If you have a reason for there's a reason for everything. And if you stand by that reason, at the end of the day, to be the person who's going to accept it or not. The fact that just make sure whatever you say, you stay. I will admit you have to stand your ground on with terms of opinions, especially with that. That's what that separates being objective about it, and then just having just blatant like conjecture saying such and such as this and such as that, where it's like, well, you got to back that up with something. That's the thin line with it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, people don't like reading bad things about them all the time. So you have to smarten up with that stuff. But if you're objective and fair about it and just laying out the facts that are out there, like if so-and-so got arrested, chances are there's a police report, there's a police case charge, and there's something filed with it where it's like, people aren't going to like that. But at the end of the day, it's there. It's public information. It's you got arrested. I mean, I have to report what's there. I just can't be like the cop from South Park, be like, oh, there's nothing to see here. So you have to explain that to people. And with stuff like that, there's that thin line. But at the end of the day, you just make sure whatever you write or say in terms of it, you stand behind. And if they don't accept it, they don't accept it. But it's nothing that you can control with that. So.
Absolutely. So, Marquis, since I guess Zoom is limiting my time with you, I'm just gonna, I guess, structure my podcast with some of the topics that I would like to ask you because I'm interested as well. And
yes, there's this thing with Atheletic. They just laid off 8% of their workforce, and several of them are boxing writers. What do you think about that? How does the scene look for boxing writers like that got laid off as well? I know that Dan Rafael left ESPN as well just recently. What do boxing writers do after they basically leave their place of employment? In your opinion, what is the best case scenario for them?
On my end, they pretty much all of them are doing the same thing where they have to pretty much freelance. What they're doing at the Athletic is actually rough, by the way, where it's like essentially the big thing with this whole pandemic, as you may have guessed, is that everybody's losing money all over the place in terms of either revenue or money coming in. And especially at the Athletic, which gears are things around writing about sports. If there's no sports going on, it's absolutely dire for a lot of these things. It's the reason why the Zone is having a big issue as well, where I'm in the conspiracy camp where it's like, I don't see how they survive this, considering that they have no actual physical programming, which kind of stinks on their part because it's a clever idea, you know,
Mhm.
a streaming platform showing sports.
Right.
You know, it sounds great, but unfortunately, as you know, with the pandemic, there's no sports, so you're now with like what everybody else is doing, where you got the worldwide leader in sports, ESPN, is showing athletes playing video games. So
Mhm.
either you result of being a Twitch network, or you start showing, like everybody else, you start showing best ofs and greatest fights and recreations, or keep talking about the
Right.
same talking
But
points.
I feel like that
But back
doesn't
to
work.
it, at the end of the day, people get bored with it. It's like everything else, where it's like we're all. I mean, for a while, it's funny because I think boxing was just not prepared to not have any fights. Where it's like
Mhm.
I remember. I don't know if it's easy to remember at the beginning of this pandemic, where the World Boxing Super Series had like a little cool little video game simulation
Oh
of
yeah.
like Fight Night Round 3. Yeah,
Mhm.
they did it for like the first week and a half, and then they did it again,
Yeah.
and then
And
they
then what?
tried doing it the third week, and it's like, okay, man, stop. Pull the plug on this. That's kind of where all sports are in general. Where it's like it's why ESPN is having to resort to showing Korean baseball at like 1 a.m. in the morning, because I just need some sort of sports content for people, A, to gamble on, and B,
Mhm.
just to watch in general. I mean, but back to answering your question in terms of boxing writers, a lot of the writers that got laid off at the Athletic, which I think is rough, is that a lot of them are pretty much going to have to, until the market for sports picks back up, are going to have to freelance or hope they can latch on with someone as soon as possible. A lot of folks aren't able to do that right now because there's just no sports going on.
Mhm.
Dan Rafael is a special case because Dan Rafael is honestly the pedestal and the cornerstone of boxing writers up and down, where it's like you can like or hate Dan Rafael, but Dan Rafael is essentially, in all terms of boxing people, the
Mhm.
man when it comes to boxing writing. So he was
Right.
able to be, and pretty much he was able to pretty much call his own shots, where I think now he's freelancing, writing for the Ring and boxing scene. Like, I mean, if I had a newspaper or an organization and Dan Rafael wanted to write a story for my website at bigfightweekend.com, I'm not going to be like, oh, no, Dan, we're busy. So you get to call your shots on stuff like that when you're him. But everybody else, you pretty much get to pick and choose, where it's like you just got to wait for sports to pick back up, or hope that things will just turn for the better. But with the Athletic, I just know they're just doing that all across the board, with just in terms of like letting everybody there. But that's also just print and type media in general as whole. Like, I remember telling you how I want to work for the newspaper. The
Mhm.
newspaper I want to work for is no longer in business. So, and that's in town here. I mean, I live in Tampa. This isn't exactly some sort of one city town where there's only one Walmart or one McDonald's at the light. I mean,
Right.
this town only has one solid paper, and even then, people don't really read that. They can't give the paper away here. They were giving it away like 2 years ago here, where it would just front at your doorstep, and you'd be like, "What the hell is this?" And the paper. So that's kind of where print media is as a whole in general. Website media as well too. So it's rough, but at the end of the day, until boxing picks back up with actual events, it's going to be like this for a while.
Yeah, we'll see how it's going to work out. I really definitely feel bad for the writers that got laid off, and I hope they're going to land. And based on what I'm seeing on Twitter, everyone's actually praising the writers. They really give them compliments and say they're very talented and all that. So I feel like, they will land hopefully smoothly and in whatever opportunity they will be presented.
I think they will, and I think also what it is that once the market picks back up for sporting events, I think that's when all of these guys that were being let go will be immediately picked back up. That's the way I see it personally, and it just helps that we need some actual sports to write about. That's
true. That's true. And I see, we see that California is slowly opening their business. I just read the news. Hopefully the rest of the United States will open businesses as well, and sports will follow as well. Going back to my second topic is Mike Tyson. So we've seen Mike Tyson doing his wrestling shtick just recently. Can we just agree that that's what he was planning to do with the whole publicity stunt? I don't know. I don't think he's going to fight. Can we just say that he's not going to fight anymore? Or do you think there's still a chance that he will do some sort of exhibition thing or whatever?
He's going to do it. I'm in the camp where I think he's going to do an exhibition. The question is who's going to regulate it and who's actually going to put up with it. Where my thing is, Tyson is actually recreating 1997 for him all over again when he was facing Evander Holyfield. He's going back into wrestling because he's done this before. In 97, he was facing he got into the ring for WWE or WWF back in the day with Stone Cold Steve Austin. They had this big dust up, shocking. Wrestling conversations don't go well, and they get angry. They start a fight. Who knew? But so he did it again. I think like 2 weeks ago on this AEW show on TNT. So he's trying to make the rounds again with this stuff. It's a quality publicity stunt. I think we're all looking into this. This man's 53 years old. I mean, you read boxing Twitter when he was doing these workout videos. You think he's like, oh, he can face Wilder. Like, what? Like, huh? Like,
I
come
feel
on
like
now.
it's just, yeah, I was thinking, like, why are we so excited that Tyson is sort of back in the gym, right? Why are we? It's a lot of nostalgia, right? We want him to be back. We want that. That's the same reason why we get all these remakes of the movies. We want that feeling again. Nothing gets us going like it used to before, and people just craving that. And Tyson might as well capitalize on that, and more power to him. As long as I hope he's not going to get injured or anything like that. But who knows? Yeah, it depends on his opposition. Maybe he'll get matchmake with someone. Maybe Holyfield will give him some weird matchmaking now that they both are old as fuck, so they can actually provide some sort of a, like, I don't know, some spectacular fight where we have like knockouts and all of that at the same time, but it's not like Tyson fighting some new guy, some young dude. Yeah, and he's going to get knocked out. And we're like, shit, Tyson, why would you do that? So I hope it's going to be spectacular like that. But it's just like two old dudes like really going at it.
You know what? It sounds great and real out in your mind, but I'm gonna bring it back to what you mentioned before. Like we have this big thing with nostalgia, and we keep remaking everything. And unfortunately, as you well know, a lot of these remakes fucking suck. So, and I don't expect this to be any different. And the one thing I will mention with Tyson as well with that, where it's like, I know he's in shape. I mean, not for nothing, he looks like someone's jacked up grandpa at this point. So I will give him credit for that. But the one thing with Tyson that is always intriguing, why we all like crave for this, is where, like, because there's only one Mike Tyson. That's the big deal with that, where he's this weird enigma where it's like you just never know what's going on with him. I mean, this guy went from being on top of the world to being upset to being in jail, coming back to biting a man's ear to getting a tattoo on his face and to doing movies and weird cartoons. Mm-hmm. And then getting out of boxing and doing one-man plays. I mean, you just never know with Tyson what the hell he's going to do next. So I think we're all in that camp and seeing how it looks. But in terms of actual boxing ring ability and fighting, I don't expect much of anything at all.
I think it's going to be 30 seconds of action and then just a bunch of hugging, and that's going to be a decision fight anyways.
But anyways, and thankfully it'll be an exhibition, so it's no big deal.
Exactly. It's like, I just hope it's going to be fun. Either way, I'm going to watch it, and everyone's going to tune in as well. So more power to Tyson for still capitalizing on his star power. So that's that. My second subject that I want to talk to you is Canelo Derevyanchenko fight. Derevyanchenko, how we say it in Russian. Do you think this is happening, and what kind of fight will it be in your opinion? How is Derevyanchenko going to hold up against Canelo?
Honestly, it depends all on two things. One, Canelo and who he wants to fight, and two, if he's going to actually have a platform to fight on. I'm going with Canelo.
You're still saying DAZN is going down.
I am in the opinion that DAZN is going the way of the OWB, the Dumont Network, the XFL. Like, I just don't. It's hard to sustain what they're doing when they're charging people currently the subscription base that they already don't really have, and they're charging them still full price, and there's nothing to verify or show for it. I just honestly, it comes up as a scam service at this point, where it's like, and you see horror stories if you type in, DAZN sucks on Twitter, you just get a grocery list of people complaining and bitching about it to the point of no return, or you get people complaining about people are pausing their subscriptions and they're still taking the money out. I mean, that's the shit AOL used to do back in the 2000s, where everyone realized we don't have to pay for this crap anymore. It's the same sketchy stuff. So I'm in the camp of that part of it. But to answer your question with Canelo, I also thought Canelo was going to fight Billy Joe Saunders. I really think that fight should happen if they find some way to make that happen one way or another. Depending on the travel restrictions, I think once they lift that, I think we're getting that fight first. But it also comes down to what Canelo. If Canelo came out last week saying he's willing to fight with no fans. I mean, it's easy for a man who gets paid $35 million a fight to say, hey, I'll fight for nobody. Yeah, cool. Who's going to pay for that $35 million? I mean, and how much of a discount is he going to take? Is he going to take $32 million? That's cool. Or $30 million? And the problem also with that is they mentioned other fighters. They mentioned, the Derevyanchenko. They mentioned, I want to say Anthony Durrell at one point. I mean, the other list of super middleweights at 168. And the bigger issue with that is that in order for Canelo to take a pay cut, he's going to have to negotiate with someone else on that B side of it to take a pay cut as well. And everyone fighting Canelo knows in their mind that he's the richest guy getting paid in boxing. They want a piece of that pie. That's what helped the Kovalev talk for so long, because everybody and their great grandma knew he was going to face Sergey Kovalev one way or another after the Yarde fight. And you see these news stories from De La Hoya and Golden Boy being like, well, we're still negotiating. We're trying to keep the price low. It's like, there's no price low on this. Canelo wants to fight this guy, or he's going to complain about it. And that's kind of what happened. He complained about it, and then they had to pay the money up. And I think at the end of the day with Kovalev, I think you got paid for that fight $10 million.
That's the amount that I'm heard as well.
Yeah. I mean, so you're telling me that if Canelo's taking a discount, say of like 20 million, it's just kicks and giggles. I mean, A, this one's going to come with 20 million bucks. I don't know where that's at. And B, if he's taking 20, how much is the other guy going to get? You're going to tell the other guy that Derevchenko and whatnot, he's only get like 3 or 4, which is weird. And you mentioned, it's funny with Derevchenko because he just fought this fight with Triple G, as we all know. That was an IBF mandatory bout. That bout, I think, went for a purse bid, as we all know, for like $5.5 million bucks. So now you're going to tell this guy who just came off a tough loss, where people still may argue to that he may have won that fight. Hey, you want to face Canelo? Sure. Can you do it for like $2.5 million? I'm going to tell you to kick rocks. So I took a lot of that going on. So it depends on how much they can lowball the opposition for Canelo with that, and B, if the zone can actually afford to have this fight go on with nobody in the stands, which I just don't see either one of those two things happening.
I was just thinking about the contract with Canelo's, 35 mil flat fees and all of that. I wonder if they have a force majeure stipulation where, coronavirus definitely can be classified as a force majeure, where they can actually demand some sort of a discount. And I know even if they will, it's going to go through some courts and litigation and all of that. But I feel like maybe DAZN can use that as their grounds for like lowering the payout for their fighters. Who knows?
Who knows what but that may be the case. But then you'd think as a promotional outlet for with Canelo for Golden Boy, where it's like, I mean, the more money that Canelo makes, the more money Golden Boy makes. You'd think somewhere down the line is someone's taking a pay cut. We just don't know who it's going to be, and I just don't see how both of those guys. I don't know how just that whole chain of events is going to see eye to eye on all of that. Where it's like, especially with it's only with Canelo in Triple G with like these fight discounts. I just don't see how they're going to do it. Everybody else in the grand scheme of things has already come out and either said, hey, I'm not going to fight on this as revenue. Like you see with PBC, for example, like they mentioned,
they get part of the gate. They're boxers.
Yeah, they get part of the revenue. Where it's like, of course they're going to say they're not going to fight without fans. That's money off the table. Why would they? So, I mean, that's why you're seeing with Top Rank. Even Bob has mentioned this on when he was doing his interview rounds before the Secure Stevenson fight this week, where he mentioned on a lot of these shows where it's like we're still paying the fighters, but we're only asking the fighters to take the guarantee. We're not paying anything over the guarantee. So so essentially Top Rank is pretty much paying these fighters what they're normally getting paid. They're just not paying them anything additional like a bonus or anything at the revenue like that. So and which is fair. So that's where I wonder where this discount that I hear like people are going to say like, these guys are going to all take. I mean, we'll see at the end of the day when it happens. The cool thing about it is when California opening up as well as Nevada, those guys disclose the actual amount of money these guys are getting for these fights. So we'll find out sooner or another if these guys are fighting in like, Fight Island somewhere, one of these unknown locations, or even down here when they were fighting in Florida where they don't disclose the purse records or whatnot. Because I've been asking for like the UFC fights that happened last month down here. Hey, how much are these guys getting? Where it's like, well, UFC disclosed it, but if you ask the State Athletic Commission, they have no idea, and they kind of turn their blind eye to it. So,
but let's say theoretically, Derevchenko fights Canelo. Obviously, Derevchenko is a tough fighter, much tougher than a lot of people thought he was against Triple G. It was a rough fight. Which, by the way, would be how lucky would Derevchenko be to fight Jacobs, Triple G, and Canelo like within the short period of time like this, and like to get all those 3 top level fighters. For a Ukrainian boxer who is not well known, that's crazy to me. But
that feat's amazing. He went from fighting Jack Cutley to all these big names, and it's like, are you serious? Like, wow! Like this guy stays at the top. Like this guy stays at the top of the IBF food chain, and more power to him for that. In all honesty,
yeah, and more power to his team, I guess, as well. I mean, I think he's being advised by Al Heyman, and I'm not sure who his manager is.
I don't know who his manager is, but his trainer is still Andre Rozier. So.
Yeah, plus the trainer is Andre Rozier, which was funny with the fight against Jacobs. How he had to basically because Andre Rozier also trains Jacobs if I'm not wrong. But anyways, how do you think this fight will go?
Honestly, I think it's the one thing with Canelo fights where it's like I just don't see anything extraordinary out of it. I think we get. I think it plays out a lot like the. I think it plays out for him the same way that Alvarez Jacobs played out last Cinco de Mayo. I think it plays out like that in terms of not last Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo from last year. There was no Cinco de Mayo this year, but in 2019, where the fight was pretty much where
like
Jacobs was able to really, pretty much Alvarez just boxes around him because he just uses his footwork around everybody for the most part for his fight.
So he's not going to go for the kill.
I don't think he'll go for the kill on that one. To be honest with you.
Yeah, I can see that too. But also, I don't know how Derevyanchenko is feeling right now because, by the way, like the whole suspension that he's still suspended by New York State Athletic Commission, where he was suspended for a long time. Is that a factor? I don't even know if that's serious or not, or it's just like what does this mean when he's suspended for such a long time? Do they really keep up on his health?
They don't really keep up with like that. I think the way he was suspended, they suspend everybody after fights in New York just as a general.
Well, yeah, for a couple of weeks. It's
just a couple of weeks. I didn't hear anything after that besides that. Actually, if he's still suspended, that's kind of bizarre. But maybe they just haven't. It may just be a paperwork error, but it may be something along those lines where it's like, no, usually just do it for a couple of weeks. It's for health reasons. That way you're not doing like they do like in the 30s where you'll fight on Monday and then like Thursday, hey, I'm ready to go again. Any of that nonsense.
Right.
Those days are over. But that's really weird that he's still because for most of the young people I know that are still suspended from the state from New York at least is Ivan, the guy who fought Danny Garcia because he bit his ear. So. Outside of that, I didn't know anybody else was still canned. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't know how this works, but I mean, yes, they do have a medical checkup after the fight. But then, like, okay, if something is wrong, let's say there's a broken eye socket or something like that, does New York State Athletic Commission send their doctor to keep up with doctors who the fighter is using and all that, and then they exchange information, and then like, okay, is he fine? Okay, cool. Like, how does this work? But I mean, that would make sense. But
that would make sense on that part, but I think that may be the case where it's like because I know Arreola was suspended for a while in New York after his fight with Konaki because he had an injured hand. So I think what happens is once they show the medical records and you prove to him that hey he's functional, here's our waiver, here's the medical records, then they just lift it. It's one. I think it's just one of those things where they just haven't lifted it off with anything and they haven't told the fine folks at Boxwork about that. They got to keep Boxwork people busy. So it's what they do with that stuff.
All right, moving on to the next topic, and it's kind of like a crazy, silly topic, but kind of in the line.
No, bring it.
Well, it's Triple G with Manny Pacquiao, right? Which is just a weird kind of
that is
throw down by Freddie Roach, like, Manny's ready for Triple G if he needs to do. But by the way, I just got off the phone with Tom Loeffler. We were doing Instagram Live together like an hour ago, and I asked him this, and like, Tom, what's happening? What do you think? And he says, like, I don't know, Freddie is just a good promoter. It's just I don't see this happening. Like, so Tom is basically he doesn't see it as a serious kind of a proposition or a serious kind of talk. But again, as we said before, a stranger thing happened in boxing, and let's say Manny Pacquiao, because I don't see Triple G going below 160, that's for sure. So Manny Pacquiao will have to go up to 160. Let's see if he dares to do this, which I don't even see physically how he can do it. Let's say he does it. Like, what do you think will happen?
I think Triple G stops it like in 2 rounds. But no, it's one of those things where it's one of those fake fancy matchup things where I think Tom will probably convince what you is where it's like, hey, it's quality fancy booking. At this point, it's because we have no actual live fights or no live big name fights. We're doing all these hypotheticals and fancy matchups, and that clearly is one of them. Where we have Triple G coming down like they fight at 160, where it's Triple G training down to 160, and you got Manny at more likely his walk around weight, which is not exactly the way to go. So he has to bulk up to it, or at least muscle up to it, and that's just at age 40. I mean, and you know what it is? I think in terms of that, it's just the drawability and the star power for it. And
of course.
Usually and the big thing with a lot of these fancy matchups I've realized too, where it's like they realize that there's no fights happening either in the United States or United Kingdom with fans. Mm-hmm. So every single one of these imaginary fight scenarios you always hear at this point, and it's been like this like the last ever since this pandemic broke out, it's like, hey, big name fighter A is fighting big name fighter B in Saudi Arabia. You can pretty much plug and play in any matchup you've heard in the last 6 weeks. That's all you've been hearing, where it's like, well, why are they fighting in Saudi Arabia? Well, that's where the money's at. So they all do that. And it's like, okay, like how many of these fancy Saudi Arabia matches are we going to hear? I mean, we've heard, when the pandemic broke, that they're going to pay, Deontay Wilder to skip the Tyson Fury fight for the 3rd time. He's going to fight, Joshua in Saudi Arabia. We've heard that one. Garcia, Pacquiao, Saudi Arabia. I've heard that one. Amir Khan, Manny Pacquiao again is making the rumor mill again in Saudi Arabia. I mean, at this point, Saudi Arabia is becoming the new Las Vegas. But unfortunately, none of these fights are going to happen. So,
unfortunately, you can do certain things. You cannot do certain things in Saudi Arabia that you can do in Vegas. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, there's that too. There's a freedom issue as well, and it's like you got to convince these guys, hey, we'll back up the Brinks truck. You're just gonna follow it with your passport, and it's like some of it just doesn't add up. And that last week with this whole Triple G Pacquiao stuff I thought was kind of funny actually, where it's like that came out of the works. Where it's like I really think Pacquiao, if he's fighting next go around, and I think he's gonna disappoint everybody with this. I think he's gonna fight Keith Thurman again in a rematch. I think I'm set on this for some reason or another, and I know I'm probably the party of one on this. Talking to you about this, I just have this weird feeling where he's because it's one of those weird Pacquiao rematch fights. And I can just see where
well, let's think about it. Let's think about it. If you're Pacquiao, what's your main potential cash grab? It's Floyd Mayweather 2, right? So in order to stay in that Floyd Mayweather 2 level, what do you do as Manny Pacquiao? Well, you have to protect your brand, the brand of this crazy guy from Philippines who are still in his 40s, still can knock people out. He's still super energetic and all of that, right? So you don't want to fight against Triple G or someone else like this for a potential very little less cash grab and tarnish your brand that will potentially, worsen your chances to fight Floyd Mayweather. And Floyd has to do his own thing to kind of get back into the boxing and also be perceived as a competitive opposition, right? So if you're Pacquiao, do you want to do any risks at all? I feel like in the past several fights, we Broner,
Thurman,
the guy I just mentioned with the flute, what's his name? I forget.
Yeah, Thurman,
yeah. When I think Keith Thurman is always like his picture with the flute.
It's always that flute thing. He's not going to shake that ever in his lifetime, to be honest with you.
Hey, I don't know why he needs to shake it off. Let him do the flute thing. I like it.
Yeah.
But anyways, I feel like that's where Pacquiao is right now. Is hey, maybe you shouldn't actually even take fights. I feel like with those two fights that you had, Broner and Thurman, I feel like you're pretty solid in terms of your brand, in terms of the fact that you're still, you've still got it. Just wait for Floyd to do his thing, and if they're gonna get together, I don't think the fight's gonna be as big as the first one, but it's still gonna be a significant amount of money, and that's what I feel like Pacquiao should aim for, and I think that's what he's being advised to do. I mean, you don't want to take risks for lower money, especially in this environment of low business productivity, basically with low output of profits.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And in terms of that as well, I'm in the camp where I really don't think Floyd's coming back at this point. Only because I just don't think Floyd wants to. I mean, I think he's willing to do anything around boxing to be around it. I saw him actually. He still goes to the fights and attends all the events. I mean, he was at the Gervonta Davis Jokic Gamboa fight last December in Atlanta. He was sitting ringside with Ellerbe and the gang for all of that stuff. He's still around the fights and everything else. He's still training,
right, and working the midst with Haney, So I mean, he's still kind of in the
He still wants to be a part of it, but I don't think he wants to be actually in it. And the one fight rumor that's been rumored as well, mentioning it, speaking of Saudi Arabia, they mentioned with Pacquiao, they always hinted at Conor McGregor, which is one of those things where it's like, as goofy as it sounds on paper, and trust me, it is. Conor McGregor is still, as much people love or hate UFC, he's one of their biggest draws there. So
there's going to be money. I mean, the fight is going to be funny as usual with him. With the boxing thing, well, not as usual.
And that's kind of the deal with that, where it's like because I keep hearing that rumor as well, and I can see that fight making more sense as opposed to any of these other ones where it's like, hey, when are we getting Pacquiao Spence? So it's like, I don't think we're ever going to get Pacquiao Spence or any of that stuff. It's like, I don't think Pacquiao at this point, to wrap up his career, is trying to unify the belts at 147 to solidify his already Hall of Fame career. I don't think he really gives a crap about any of that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But that's why it really is for a cash grab.
See, that's the thing. Like, I will never know that because I'm not in the fighter's mind, especially in that level. But there's always like money versus the the game, versus the status, versus like being on top, being in the ring, being the performer in the theater, being in front of thousands of people cheering for you and being like having that godlike feeling. I never experienced that as a champion, right? But they know it, and that's why we see so many people come back for that. Yes, there's money, but there's something more to it. So I don't know if there's a factor for Floyd. I don't know if there's a factor if this is a factor for Manny, especially when you have so much money, But who knows? But Errol Spence is another case, is where if I was Errol Spence in my first fight, and I know that there's like another fight that has been kind of set in stone, but fighting Floyd right now, going out of that car crash and sort of ending. I'm sorry, I said Floyd. I meant Manny Pacquiao, and ending and ending his career, kind of will put you back on that boxing stage. Even though Manny is kind of like, Manny's always insured by the fact that he's old. If he loses, he'll just say, "Hey, I'm old. Like there's nothing else I can do." But if you win against Manny Pacquiao, I feel like that still gives you some points as well. But I don't
it's the idea of having that name on your fight resume, where it's like you beat Manny Pacquiao. I mean, how great does that sound, honestly? And it's one of those things with Spence, where I do believe that as well. And with Spence in general, where it's like, that Spence Garcia fight was already set to stone before everything was said and done. With or without the pandemic, with or without fights and all that stuff, that fight was going to happen one way or another. We're just getting it later than sooner. And it's funny with Spence, where it's like, I mean, Spence still has something to, obviously build his career up, as opposed to with Pacquiao. I really just think Pacquiao was looking for like the next 2 to 3 big fights he can get, and then, to do his thing with the whole Philippines government thing. So I just don't see, I don't see him taking any type of matchup where it's going to put him at a risk per se. That's just my thing. I will agree with you on that, where it's like, I don't see him tasting like, he's not going to face. We're not getting Braun or Pacquiao too. Like, we're not getting into that stuff. So we'll see what happens.
You think Pacquiao's going to run for president?
In the Philippines, yeah, that's a done deal. I think he already has it. I think he already has it won. Actually, I think he's just waiting to buy time. I really do.
Yeah, he's just waiting for the other guy to finish so that he can step in. That would be funny. I can imagine Pacquiao standing next to Putin or whoever else. And then they exchange some joking blows.
Well, no, you know what it is. Like all the world leaders, you'll have Putin, all the other world leaders, just standing next to Manny Pacquiao, because every person does this, and fighters hate it. I know Tim Bradley and Andre Ward hate this when you talk to them about this. They all have to have like that fight pose of like their fight stance. They all have this when they have these pictures where it's like everybody does it. It's like you're not going to get away from it. Right. If you fought in the ring, you're getting a photo. You're getting a person doing this in the background. You're just guaranteed every time.
That's so funny.
You're getting that boxer selfie.
I know. It's ridiculous. I just can't wait for everything to be back, and at least we can have some new developments. Because honestly, I kind of burned out. Like, I've done so many Zoom calls and so many Zoom podcasts about, with boxing people, but like with boxing not existing around, and it's just like, at what point is this enough? And I'm feeling like, okay, I'm approaching this moment where like I'm ready to like have some sort of new paradigm of boxing, so that I can finally talk about something else in terms of boxing as well. But so they better start now.
Yeah, we're at that wall now where it's like there's nothing going on, and all we're doing is pretty much talking about fights that may, or more than likely may not happen, and we can just sit and conjecture, and we're back to making lists of all that, the greatest fighters and all that, the usual run-of-the-mill stuff that happens in boxing media and Twitter and social media as a general, where it's like, man, I really wish we had a fight to stop this conversation. And that's what we need. We need fights to stop these conversations, and until we get those fights, we're stuck with these conversations.
I actually saw you tweet something about like you actually getting booked for some events or for some sort of a work projects. What are you working right now in terms of boxing? Are you writing about something? Are you being invited to some events to cover? What's on your horizon right now?
On my end, pretty much they got me back in the boxing media swing of things on my end. So I'm being invited to all the conference media calls they have with the fighters beforehand. Like we hear like the pre-fight notes, everything else. You get to hear like, for example, with Top Rank upcoming, you get to hear Testator and Bradley speak about the fights and all that stuff. You get to hear the fighters talk, say how a camp was. nothing really crazy on that part, but just general media. I'm doing about all that stuff again.
Uh-huh.
Gotten back into that with them. They're doing with the media as well. I know Top Rank's going to do this. I'm pretty sure the rest of them are going to follow suit. They're doing pretty much like for post-fight conferences. They're doing pretty much these Zoom calls where you speak to the fighters, via this, and they just yeah. UFC's already put the blueprint for this already out. Where like you'll do the interview and they have like the person in the corner and it's like they'll raise your hand and they'll unmute your mic, yada yada for questionnaires and stuff. So they're doing that with media on my end. So I'm still doing that for my stuff for BigFightWeekend.com. That's my writing outlet. So I'm always able to do that with them. Still talking with everybody, obviously I'm talking with you about it. Anybody who wants to talk boxing, I'm talking to anybody. Tony Bruno on Sirius XM Radio. I'm pretty much, he made me his de facto boxing insider. So I put that on the resume everywhere I go now. But it's up with him, locally here, radio with Rock Riley, pretty much just talking boxing wherever I can. Until we get some more fights. I know we're having, fights on Tuesday, and then after that, they're probably going to open up the calendar with more fights on with Top Rank at least over the summer, because their summer schedule is sort of kind of set up. Some of it's better than others, but the one thing that they are doing that I think is smart on their end is they're putting these fights back on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which makes sure they're not in competition with any other remote sporting event that could possibly happen, like a UFC or whenever they say basketball picks back up, stuff like that, or whenever they film these NASCAR events or, all that nonsense. So they're not going to be in any competition. And it helps now that Major League Baseball can't get the money part right. So they're not going to – I'm convinced, honestly, at this point, the only baseball you're going to play this year is on MLB The Show. So until they fix that stuff, that's all a done deal. So it helps with ESPN and with Top Rank where they're pretty much the only sporting event they can show that's not on ESPN, because that's not a video game contest or Korean baseball or them replaying a football game from 25 years ago that's not in HD. They've been doing a lot of that lately, which is weird because you look at these games on TV and it's like, man, this is old. And it's like, how do you know it's old? Because it's in letterbox and like half my screen's cut off.
The non-HD videos are very uncomfortable to watch these days, and even during the Michael Jordan
even documentary, like
I was just like, stop it.
man, this man has hair, and this video sure is VHy. Yeah, it's like it's a lot of that. It's a lot of master tapes, and it's like, oh man, like the tech. I mean, there's ways to restore it in HD with some of these HD stuff, but like with some of that stuff, you just can't touch it, and it's like, oh man.
I was a huge proponent of restoring old fights into like the 4K kind of format, how they do certain videos these days. But I've been told that it's just too expensive to do and no one wants to do it.
I think it's a price issue on that point, but I will admit though, like with you would think that technology would cheapen at some point, because even like everybody at this point should have an HD TV. If not, you're probably not watching television. And don't get me wrong, I'm the last person with technology. I think my cell phone still has the antenna on the back of it. So I mean, I understand all that stuff.
I don't know. After my problems with microphone today, I feel like I'm the last person with technology. This was crazy stuff today.
I don't know. My phone still has the old school 8-bit ringtones on this, so I may be behind you on this, man. It's okay, but it may still have that big pimpin' ringtone from 2001. But nevertheless,
they should make a comeback.
See, they need to bring that stuff back. I mean, we can bring back Tyson, at age 55 to get in the ring. It's like, actually current. I mean, because to me that's like bringing back like the Scooby-Doo movies or like Ghostbusters or the Smurfs, and it's like we're really can't find anything else to do with this stuff. We're really going down this rabbit hole again.
The one movie that I'm watching forward to is the movie called Tenet by Christopher Nolan, and it has Denzel Washington's son in it, who's a good actor actually from Ballers. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That movie Tenet. No one knows what it's about, but it looks so amazing. I want to watch it.
I've seen previews for that. No, that looks interesting because also it's the summer now, and I think a lot of these production companies with film stuff, they didn't before this pandemic hit. I guess they didn't have enough time to edit a lot of these films. They're supposed to come out like over during the summer. That's why I think at this point, like the big movies that you're seeing right now coming out is pretty much your movie Tenet and that Pete Davidson comedy movie, which I think they may have filmed like 4 years ago. It looks like at this point, but.
Is that a comedian with the tattoos? Is that Pete Davidson?
Yeah, that film. It's like, that movie that looks like they could have filmed that pretty much any time within the last 5 years. So it's like, oh, what movie do we have with a comedian that's sort of still on TV right now? Pete Davidson, like, when are we going to air this? Well, we were going to make this a TV movie. Well, there's no more movies out right now. Go ahead and put it in the theaters. So it's like, oh, yeah, you can stream it now. Like, oh,
Man, theaters are dead right now. I don't know how long
Yeah, I see.
come back.
I don't. You know what's funny? I think movie theaters are going to come back before the Zone does at this point, and I think they're both in bad shape. They're both in very bad shape.
I don't know. I still have a feeling the Zone is not gonna go away. But at the same time, I can totally understand when they say like, okay, this whole boxing in America thing, we're just gonna cut this. We're just not gonna pay anyone. Let them sue us. We don't incorporate it under another company. Let that company go under bankruptcy and all that. They're gonna like come up with something. Who knows? That's also a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised.
You know what? I can see them doing this whole they used to do this like back in the day with like imprint music labels back in like the late 90s and early 2000s where like a rapper or like a so-and-so artist would make like a music label, and then like that imprint label will get stuck with copyright lawsuits, and then they'll just like let that fall by the wayside, go to bankruptcy, and then they'll reappear with a different label, and show organization of that label company. So I can see a lot. So if we see the new DAZN or DAZN 2 come out, or they spell it backwards, where it's like Zenad, where it's like, oh, okay, what's this? Oh, it's DAZN again, but it's a different channel. Where they flip the letters around. Like I can see a lot of that sketchiness going around. But
right.
But until they actually, my thing with DAZN, and the reason why I keep saying that they're on the down end of this, where it's like they furloughed all their employees, where it's like it's one of those things where it's like the only people working there are the ones that they haven't furloughed yet, and it's like you got to bring the people back to bring the shows back on. So it's like it's a lot. And on that term with boxing, it's actually a lot of overhead. And it's funny because it's a lot of overhead that actually I think even with ESPN on their part, they're not doing all the way yet. Like these Top Rank shows, they're pretty much they're broadcasting like the play-by-play and stuff. Like Joe Tessitore is doing it like over in the Connecticut ESPN studios. Ward Bradley and the gang are doing it from their house like we are right now. So that's how they're calling these fights. So it's going to be a drip process until everyone can get together, until everyone can make money doing it. It's going to be a lot of this going on until otherwise.
Yeah, but I mean, ESPN though, they're backed by Disney. Disney is backed by cash, and we'll see. ESPN definitely has more chances to stay afloat than the up and coming DAZN. But we'll see.
Yeah, DAZN's just not accessible. That's the difference. They weren't accessible before the pandemic, and now afterwards, where it's like, oh, it's a streaming app. I mean, is it on Hulu? Like, no. Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, and also what else might happen is ESPN or whatever other network might just acquire DAZN and all their contracts and all their rights and keep it as a brand for another year or so, and then they're just going to be completely swallowed by, let's say, ESPN.
Like ESPN Plus, yeah. I can see that way they did the old network government guerrilla takeover, where it's like, oh yeah, well, you guys can work for yourselves for a couple of bits, and then all of a sudden things just start slowly going away. Like,
But what is it to go away? Except maybe a couple commentators, maybe a journalist. Like, who knows if they're gonna stay there if they already have ESPN? I mean, yes. What's gonna go away if they're gonna merge? When companies merge, firings happen. That's also that's the worst.
That's part of business.
Yeah. But at the same time, in terms of assets, what does DAZN have? It's just the rights for the fights, the contracts with the fighters. And that's what the main thing is. And, if that's the case, then maybe we'll see some better fights. But I feel like that's the main thing that the networks will be after. It's not their infrastructure. It's not their servers that they stream on. ESPN has all of that. It's just those contracts that ESPN will be after, or whoever it is will be, for potentially if they want to take over the zone. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if that happens, and we'll see who's all left on the zone for them to even take over. I'm going to use the great wrestling cliche on you. When WWE took over WCW, pretty much kind of the same issue where it's like, hey, we're taking over your contract, yada yada. Either you have the option to work with us, or you can work on your old contract and stay home. And for the most part, a lot of those WCW wrestlers back in that day, they all just stayed home. Where it's like, I'm going to do this guy. I'm getting paid regardless. So it's like I can sit in my hammock here and watch the checks keep clearing. So we'll see what happens with that. Look, unfortunately, with the zone, a lot of those guys don't have that option. But
they have to fight to get that guaranteed amount. I think that's the point.
Yeah. But we'll see.
Yeah. Marquis, we're approaching an hour of our conversation. Luckily, the Zoom spared our conversation. I feel like they're just saying that it's a gift that we can record for more than 40 minutes. Is their strategy to actually cut this in the future so that they don't have to apologize for that. But in any case, thank you, Zoom, for allowing us to talk.
Zoom's gonna jam us on these chats sooner or later, man. Just give it time.
I know. But I'm telling you, they're gonna go down once this pandemic is over. Like then they're gonna become just the other, just any other app. In any case, Marquis, Marquis Jones, thank you so much. Tell everyone, please, how can they find you on Twitter, Instagram, or any other social media or websites?
Absolutely. You can find my boxing writings, all that first things first. You can find that at bigfightweekend.com. Anything on Twitter, social media, Twitter, Instagram, it's all at Weak Sauce Radio. Still one of my favorite Twitter handles ever. I'm surprised that hasn't caught on more often, actually. But yeah, you can find my stuff there. I'm pretty much tweeting about boxing on Twitter, boxing Twitter all over the place. Pretty much like I got into the point on boxing Twitter where people see my posters like, oh, I thought I was already following you. Be that person. Follow me at Weak Sauce Radio.
Follow him. I followed him. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. I think I'm a fun follow, to be honest with you. I mean, I tweet, for most part, I'm usually tweeting boxing news or some sort of sports take, something along those lines. I mean, I'm willing to argue with you if you want, sort of, kind of, not really. But in terms of that stuff, yeah, you can follow me there. Pretty much you can catch me whenever I'm doing radio interviews with on SiriusXM on Tony Bruno's show. That's during the week when he's on there, Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 with him and Harry Mays. Those are good peoples. Locally in town, Rock Raleigh, if you find them on AM 10, actually it's AM 820 now. They just switched stations. They did a format switch. I mean, AM radio in this country I don't know if it's like it up there in your neck of the woods, but essentially it's all going the way of the Nintendo cartridge where they're just blowing these stations out and they're all being consolidated into one big mega
Not
game.
Surprisingly. Yeah.
It's one of those dying art forms at this point. I normally it's not quite like writing for the newspaper, but it's pretty close. But you can find me doing stuff like that with Rock Raleigh. I'm talking with him every so often on AM 820 during the week, whenever I'm on there. But no, if you just follow me on Weak Sauce Radio on Twitter, I can keep you up to date on all that fun stuff, and you can find my stuff there.
What about YouTube? You should get your own YouTube channel as well.
You know what? I need to work on this YouTube stuff, man. My thing with YouTube is I need to find a way to get either a subscription base where I can make like everybody's get that YouTube money. I heard they're paying pennies on the dollar now. Is that still a thing?
I don't know. I'm not getting paid. I don't have any subscribers.
Oh, damn. We need to work on this Ponzi scheme, man. But yeah, we'll make that happen.
I have 135 subscribers, and I love them so much because they, for some reason, decided to subscribe, and that's just such a commitment. I was just talking about that in the chat.
Yeah.
But what I love about YouTube is their platform and the stats that they give you. Like they give you so much cool stats that you can work with. And develop, so basically check it out. I really feel like you should have your own YouTube channel as well. I feel like you're very talented. You have a very positive energy, and it was always a pleasure talking to you. And thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Absolutely, man. Interview me on the podcast, man. Feel free to have me on anytime, man. I appreciate the conversation. It's always fun stuff.
Thank you so much. Marquis Jones, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, man.